Hi fans, please like our video and subscribe to the RotoWire channel. Then please go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL Hockey Puckcast with Statsman and AJ. Friends, I'm Paul Bruin in Toronto, Ontario, and you can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Scholes, who's a great follow at AJ Scholes24 in his co-host chair in Madison, Wisconsin. We all want to wish you the best of the holiday season. Hope you had a nice Christmas, AJ. It was nice for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Had some time with the kiddos and the family. I bought the four of us some penguin pajamas. They're not completely matching. The two girls are. Their pajamas are matching. Got some other ones for my wife and I, so we can wear our penguin PJs before games and while crawling into bed.
Very, very cool, my friend. It's always nice to wear your team's colors. You'll notice that I'm wearing a different sort of sweater today. It's a nod to a friend of mine, Brian McFarlane. Fans of a certain vintage will remember him as the intermission host here north of the country, north of the border for Hockey Night in Canada. That's the logo up here. This is a hockey sweater that I found in Niagara Falls on my way to a hockey conference for the society that Brian told me about, actually, about 25 years ago, the Society for International Hockey Research. I served on the board of directors there for about 20 years, became president of the group, and it's filled with luminaries in the hockey world. A very vibrant society that does a lot of research into the hockey history and things that are going on today. A lot of people in the media belong to this group, so it was really great for me to meet Brian. And recently, he got awarded the Order of Canada, which is the highest civilian order that is given out in this country, and I'm very proud to say I wrote the application for him. So I'm really happy for Brian, and this is my little tribute to him today. But back to today's show, AJ, as the season approaches, we're likely to see a number of transactions as quite a few teams are still over the salary cap. One of those clubs is the Tampa Lightning, but they took a big step toward fixing that with a trade that sent Cedric Paquette, Braden Coburn, and a 2022 second-round pick to Ottawa for Anders Nilsson and Marian Gaborik, two fellas who are both likely to wind up on the long-term injury reserve for the whole season. That opens up possibilities for the Lightning and gets them out of cap hell from my perspective. Your thoughts on that deal?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me about this, one, that's a lot to give up just for cap space, to be perfectly honest, but you do what you got to do, right? But the interesting part is like the business side of it, right? So the Senators, who are a club that has historically struggled a little bit more, they're not the most financially well-off club in part because of how ownership runs the thing. They dumped these two contracts that they would have to pay even though they weren't going to count against the cap. Conversely, you now have a team in Tampa Bay that, including Nikita Kucherov, you're paying almost $17 million worth of LTIR contracts. But the Lightning, they just won the Cup. Obviously, the revenue there for that team is really high. And so just kind of an interesting business side of this situation where, yeah, there's cap constraints on here, but you're also talking about the ability to even pay these guys their actual salaries outside of the cap and the business side of it.
Yeah, it's an onerous hit taken on by the Lightning to get out of this cap jail situation, but it was a must-do. And the fact that Kucherov winds up on the sidelines for the whole season might upset a lot of people's rankings of players, because you would think he's easily a top 10, maybe even a top 5 player in this league when healthy, and he'll be lost to the team for the entire regular season. That's a blow that they'll be hard-pressed to replace in their lineup. A second deal by the Senators took place last week. They also acquired Derek Stepan from Arizona for a second-round pick in 2021. This was another one to ease Arizona's cap burdens, so the Senators seems to be a catch-all for teams that are struggling against the cap, and they took advantage of this by securing a guy who I think will be no worse than a second-line center for them. Last week we pointed out in the analysis of the Northern or Canadian division, this brings up to date that group right now, and I say that Stepan will slot in as that number 2 center between Connor Brown and first-round draft pick Tim Stützle on what could be a very intriguing unit. Your thoughts, AJ?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's where I would pencil him in as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if at some point during the season he gets opportunities with the first group there with Dadonov and Tkachuk. But yeah, I would slot him in second line center. And really, when you add him and Paquette, they've really strengthened what we highlighted as a weak point last week.
And AJ, we're going to get into an analysis of the Western Division, one of the three groupings of U.S.-based teams in a moment. But before we do that, I'd like you to give a nod to our sponsor, BetMGM, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Sports bettors know that magic happens when you turn a hunch into action and apply the right amount of expertise. That's why BetMGM has teamed up with RotoWire to offer new BetMGM customers a free 6-month RotoWire subscription when they place their first bet. Register on the BetMGM app or website. Use the promo code ROTO, that's ROTO, to claim your free subscription. Once you make your first sports wager, you'll receive a season's length of RotoWire's unmatched sports insight. Find out why BetMGM is the king of sportsbooks by signing up and placing your first bet today. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. Colorado, Indiana, New Jersey, Nevada, Tennessee, and West Virginia only. Please gamble responsibly. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado and Nevada, and 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey and West Virginia. In Tennessee, call or text the red line at 800-889-9789. If you know someone if you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. Promotional offer not available in Nevada.
Check out BetMGM, folks. It's a very interesting website, and we're happy to have them along for the ride this year. We're going to get into the Western Conference now, Western Division of the NHL. AJ, a lot of these games we played late at night. I hope to tune into a bunch of them with the NHL package, and some new faces and new places we highlighted. Off the top with Anaheim, we'll begin the analysis. And on defense, they made a couple of changes that are notable for me. Kevin Schattenkirk, a guy who's rehabilitated his career the last couple of years and now has a Stanley Cup ring to boot. He was signed by the Ducks in the offseason from the Tampa Lightning. And they also brought over a guy, defenseman, a veteran from the Swedish Elite League, Cody Curran, to bolster that back end. It was a unit that faced some challenges last season, but with the addition of these two guys, I like the makeup of the group. But before we get into analysis of the defense, I want you to walk us through what the net minding mix is, familiar faces in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a week ago, it looked like they were probably going to go into the year with Anthony Stolarz as the number 2. But on the 23rd, little Christmas present for the Miller family, he signed a 1-year, $1 million contract to stay with the Ducks for another year. So, that gives them a really solid backup behind John Gibson. Gibson will, continue to carry the bulk of the workload for this team. Miller's numbers might be a little bit higher than what you saw last year just because of the condensed schedule. Look, now that we know what we're looking at, a handful of back-to-backs, but for the most part, these teams are playing every other night. There's a few 3-night breaks here and there. So the goaltending backups are going to get opportunities outside of the back-to-backs, and I think Miller is one of those guys that could see more opportunities. But ultimately, John Gibson should continue to carry the load, about 60 to 65%, I think, of the games for them.
Yeah, to me, Gibson is underrated, AJ, and it's a function of him playing on the left coast. Not a lot of people get to see him in prime time, but one of the top goalies in hockey, a real workhorse, and Miller, a very capable backup, headed to the Hall of Fame as soon as his career is over, in my opinion, as the winningest goalie in U.S. hockey history, U.S.-born players' hockey history for goalies. So a nod to both of those guys. Pretty good tandem there. I see maybe a 65-35 split in terms of the percentage of games played in the net minding situation. In terms of defense, I suggested to you and our listeners that it looks like a bolstered unit. Consider that Cam Fowler and Hampus Lindholm, two of the guys that are going to be involved in power play time, lead the pack here and are locked up for a couple of years at least with $5 million plus salary cap hits. Josh Manson and Kevin Shattenkirk, a very veteran second pairing possibly, and then Jacob Larson and Cody Curran both come in looking like they're going to fill in the third pairing roles. Christian Juice, kind of an insurance policy, a little bit younger than most of the guys on the back end. is signed for $1 million, and he'll probably spell anybody that gets hurt. He'll be the first option that they call up, AJ. What do you think of this unit?
Well, I actually think it'll be Brendan Goulet who gets that first look. He's got 59 NHL games under his belt, 14 points to show for it. He has some pretty productive numbers in the minors. So, still working on translating that to the NHL game. I'm not expecting him to be any sort of breakout star or anything like that, but I think he will actually fit in probably as the first, available guy if maybe Cody Curran doesn't work out, or he could challenge Christian Djoos for ice time. In terms of the forward group, we're looking at not a lot of change really here. You've got Sonny Milano, spent some time with them last year. And so he's got an extension and he'll stick around. So a bit of a known quality, but with the shutdown, they didn't see as much of him as they would have wanted. But first line is going to be no doubt Silfverberg, Henrique, and Rickard Rakell, I think, slots in as the right wing. I think all three of those guys are pretty sure up in having the first line spot. I mentioned Sonny Milano. He'll be on the left wing of the second line here, although I think he'll face some challenges from some of the younger guys. You've got Ryan Getzlaf and Danton Heinen. Again, the probably the only guy in that second group that should feel any sort of security is Ryan Getzlaf, and even he might face challenges from the likes of a guy like Sam Steele. The third line is those young guys. I think all of these guys will push for more opportunities. Max Jones, Sam Steele, and Troy Terry. And then a veteran group kind of rounding out a fourth kind of gritty line. Nick Delorier, Derek Grant, and Carter Rowney. They've also got David Backes available. He could really fit in anywhere. He's pretty versatile. Could play center, could play wing. So not a lot of secure spots, but a lot of youngsters that will compete for opportunities.
Hey, have you been beefing up on your French language production? You slid through that Delorier beautifully. That was very smooth, partner. Congrats, man. I think, like you, the key to the fortunes here offensively lie in the third line. I wonder particularly if Sam Steele and Troy Terry are ready to take a next step and threaten top six roles. Sonny Milano also key to improving the fortunes here. They're looking at those three youngsters to take the next step and really push some of the veterans up front. Getzlaf, I wonder how much he has left in the tank. I'd be cautious about overrating him in terms of the DFS value that he might have, or even in season-long pools, how many points he might be expected to score. He's been such a stalwart for these guys for a long time, but a little long in the tooth for me, and I think he's going to cede some playing time to the likes of Steele and Henrique in the middle of the ice this season. So I would be cautious about overrating Getzlaf looking at this team. We go on next to the Arizona Coyotes. This team has been very busy in the offseason. Another team that has issues with cap compliance, and they're doing what they can to deal with that. Tyler Pitlick, left winger, John Hayden, right winger, Dryden Hunt, left wing, Johan Larson at center, Freddie Gauthier with a PTO situation. That's that deal where a team invites a player to a tryout before he signs a contract with the club. The same thing applies to Zayn Mcintyre, a goalie who's bounced around the American Hockey League, mostly in the Boston system. He's come over for a look-see in Arizona. And right now they're negotiating a one-year deal, we hear, with Derek Brassard. Could be a possible reunion with longtime buddy Phil Kessel offensively there. We'll get to those guys in a sec. But really, most of these names are tinkering around the bottom six. The top six forwards and the top pairing defensemen seem to be all locked down. We'll get to those shortly as well. But AJ, I need you to take us through our goalie mix here again. A couple of veterans here leading the depth chart for Arizona.
Well, yeah, the biggest question for Arizona is going to be the same thing it was last year, is the health of some of these guys. Now, I'm not worried about Darcy Kemper. Yeah, he missed some games last year due to injury, but really it's Antti Raanta. I mean, since coming over from the Rangers, this guy has consistently missed a ton of time. So is he going to be able to stay healthy enough to challenge Darcy Kemper for a spot here? I don't think so. Ultimately, I think Darcy Kemper will be their number one. And I think even Aiden Hill could maybe play his way into some opportunities. They're talking about expanded rosters, and with the taxi squad thing, it's possible that they, give all three of these guys a few looks during the season. Now, I think Kemper still probably takes the bulk of the workload, but I would hazard to say it's probably closer to 50-55 for him. I don't see him, creeping up towards that 60-65%, especially if they want to give Adin Hill a few starts from time to time.
Yeah, I'd be stashing Adin Hill in the deeper leagues that I join, maybe dynasty leagues, because I think he's going to get a real shot here to take over the net minding situation from both of these veteran guys. But I look for Kemper certainly to be the workhorse of this group as the season starts, provided he can stay healthy. But don't sleep on Hill. I think he's could be a surprise contributor back here. On the back end, it looks like familiar faces will dot the top four. Oliver Ekman Larson was the subject of a lot of trade rumors, a lot of them linking him with Boston, but it looks now like Zdeno Chara might re-sign with the Bruins, and that certainly has taken that discussion off the table, I think, for the near term anyway. OEL has been one of the league's leading scorers among defensemen for the last 5 years, and looks like he lines up as their power play quarterback once again. So he'll be the guy that gets the most points from this defense group. But I think Alex Goligoski is another guy who can threaten him for that leadership within the club. I'll say he's no worse than the second power play option in terms of quarterbacking a second unit there. Jacob Chychrun has shown flashes. This guy has a very nice slapper from the point. If he can tee it up with regularity, he'll get his share of points too. That's where the offense is going to come from the back end. The rest of the guys are more defensive specialists. Pairing with OEL on that first pairing is Jason Demers, a veteran guy who is one of the better defensive defensemen in the Western Conference. Same could be said for Nicholas Hjalmarsson, and Jordan Osterley has a bit of an offensive upside too. So it's a good mix of offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities. AJ, do you think there's anybody among the depth chart that can threaten these six guys for work, or is it pretty much locked in?
I think it's pretty much locked in. I mean, maybe Jordan Gross, but ultimately, I think these are the six-pack you'll see for the time being. Now, I will say, I will be a little surprised if Oliver Ekman Larson is still on the team on April 13th, the day after the trade deadline. So I think they'll move him at some point here to get something, something out of him. But we'll see. Maybe if they're in playoff contention, maybe they keep him around and make a run at it. But again, I think I would be surprised to see him still on the team after the deadline. In terms of the forward complement, you're looking at, again, pretty much the same first group here. Nick Schmaltz, Christian Dvorak, and Connor Garland, I think, make up that first line. Well, they do have one big loss. Taylor Hall, obviously, would have been on that first line. It's how quickly we forget about him when he leaves. But yeah, I think Nick Schmaltz takes over the left wing spot. It could be Clayton Keller as well. This is another group where I think the top six guys are those guys, right? I think they'll all be in there, but they might get shuffled around a bit. So right now we have Clayton Keller, Barrett Hayton, and Phil Kessel as the second line there. But again, could be shuffled around. Brassard being added. Maybe that's a spot for him. Brassard could get back to playing a little bit of center here. Maybe he challenges Braden Hayden for that second line center spot. So I think a lot of things are on the table. Rick Tocchet will have a lot of work to do very quickly in limited training camp here to figure out what his line combinations are going to be. Larson Krause, Johan Larson, and Christian Fischer set to make up the third line. Then Tyler Pitlick, Michael Chapat, and Drake Kajula will form the third line. But again, there's a couple guys you mentioned. Gauthier could be in the mix there if he goes from PTO to full sign guy. I think Hudson Fasching is another player who could push for minutes. John Hayden as well. So a lot of uncertainty here in my opinion. But we'll see how it all shakes out for him. And like I said, Rick Tocchet is going to be a busy man.
Yeah, fans of the Coyotes have to be excited about what they've got going on at center ice. I'm hopeful that Christian Dvorak and Barrett Hayton can evolve into the players that they show they could be throughout their junior careers. Hayton, for his part, was the captain of Team Canada's juniors a year ago, and certainly a lot of it is expected of him offensively. He gets a nice situation, the way it looks on paper, settling in between Clayton Keller and Phil Kessel, perhaps the two best snipers that the Coyotes can ice on a nightly basis going forward. I'm a little unsure about Nick Schmaltz as the number one left winger. It could be the fact that they're waiting on Lawson Krause to live up to his high expectations as a junior as well. He should be the guy that really, with his skill set, takes that position, but hasn't materialized yet. So a placeholder situation for Schmaltz, and he hopes to capitalize on that. And a partnership with Dvorak, if it's successful, could really help him. Connor Garland, a guy who is kind of like the Brendan Gallagher of this team, a guy who really sticks his nose in, has some offensive skills, and shows up on the power play as a net front presence. So that's where he could have some value in terms of special teams contribution for the Coyotes. Up next, AJ, we look at the Colorado Avalanche. This is a team that a lot of people are thinking is going to go a long way in the playoffs this season and maybe the class of this division. I don't want to tip my hand in terms of the final standings yet, because there's a couple other teams that have a lot to say about that discussion. But in terms of off-season moves, Brandon Saad came in to play left wing on a top six situation. Devon Toews bolstering the top four of the blue line. Mika Salamaki, a depth player at right wing, and Dennis Gilbert similarly a depth player on the defense. So they did some tinkering around the edges, but also some tinkering that should bolster their top 9 offensive players up front and the top 4 on the blue line. Before we go there, as usual, we'll start with the goalies here.
Yeah, if there's a team in this league that could do a 28-game split, it's definitely Colorado. I think Philip Grubauer and Pavel Francouz should, fit in pretty evenly here in terms of workload. Now, it'll be interesting to see what sort of deployments we see this year. Maybe, Grubauer takes the first 2-game matchup against Arizona, and then Francouz takes the next 2 games against Anaheim or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see if they play kind of that matchup or if they do some sort of every other. But I would not be surprised to see these guys pretty much divide the nets right down the middle.
Yeah, I like this pairing in the nets, AJ. Young players who they can put their hopes on for a while. They didn't cost them a ton of money. They're paying them a combined $5 million, just over $5 million, one of the cheapest goalie tandems, but no doubt one of the more steady ones. They're age 29 and age 30 respectively, Grubauer and Francouz, so they can hitch their cart to these guys for a little while yet going forward and feel pretty good about the situation. Neither one of them is ranked as a top 10 goalie in the league, in my opinion, but steady enough behind the talent that these guys will ice night in and night out. Part of that look is based on a defense that is looking a little bit stronger with the addition of Devon Toews. Ryan Graves and Cale Makar are the number one pairing. Makar, one of the top defensemen in the NHL in terms of scoring ability. He showed very well right out of the gate. The first minute he stepped onto the ice in the NHL, hasn't looked back. And really, behind this potent offense is one of the better power play quarterbacks that you can think about. In terms of the secondary option on the power play, I would look to a guy like Samuel Girard or maybe a Ryan Graves to be that guy. Toews could even threaten that role. That's 4 guys that have a bit of an offensive upside in the top 6 defensemen. They're bolstered by the fact they have a couple of very good defensive defensemen, one of whom you're very familiar with, and Ian Cole. But Eric Johnson is a guy that I've always liked. He was once, I think, the first draft pick overall in his draft class. Not living up to that hype necessarily, but a very steady presence. And then if you're looking at youngsters to make the grade or make a step up, look out for Bowen Byram. I think this is a guy who could easily be another tremendous scoring option on the back end. He's got size, he's got skill, and one of the many first-round draft picks that is featured by Team Canada in the current World Junior Hockey Championships. And I look for big things for Byram on this unit, AJ, and I wonder if he will threaten Ryan Graves for maybe a position in the top pairing alongside Makar.
Yeah, there's a ton of guys here, up-and-comers that are really good. I love the acquisition of Devon Toews by them in the offseason. I thought that was a great move. Look, you mentioned Eric Johnson, maybe not living up to number 1 overall billing, and that may be true in hindsight, especially when you consider some of the guys that went after him: Jordan Stahl, Jonathan Toews, Nicholas Backstrom, Phil Kessel. But then again, you look at some of the other D guys that went. There's not a lot of names here that most of us are going to recognize off the bat that went in the first round. In fact, most of them I don't even recognize. A couple guys never played in the NHL at all. So he definitely was the best defenseman in that class, no question about it. So I really think overall, this is a very strong group. As you said, a lot of offensive upside here. And, if there's a guy that could compete for more opportunities behind Makar, I think Devon Toews is the one that'll slot in there. In terms of the forward complement, you've got the big guns set to show up on the first line here. And part of that is because they acquired Brandon Saad. They don't have to really spread out the scoring anymore, I don't think, since they have him. So you'll have Gabriel Landeskog, Nathan McKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen, the MGM line, back together for much of the year. Hopefully they can avoid some injuries that certainly cost them some time together last season. As I mentioned, Brandon Saad comes in, left wing number 2 there with Nazem Kadri and Andrei Burakovsky. I think Kadri's solid as the number 2 center. I would not be shocked if that's a position they try and address heading into the trade deadline to maybe get somebody else in there depending on available options. And Burakovsky will certainly start the season, I think, in that spot, but he'll face challenges from a guy like Jonas Donskoy, who slots into the third line alongside JT Compher and Tyson Jost. Again, I really like that group for what they are in terms of the third line. Jost obviously is not going anywhere near the top 6, given Landeskog and Saad ahead of him. From there, right now, it looks like it'll be a veteran fourth line in Matt Calvert, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, and Valeri Nushkin. But again, there's some guys like a Kiefer Sherwood, TJ Tynan, Shane Bowers even that could challenge for opportunities there. But overall, I think this is a pretty solid 12-pack all around. Not a ton of deficiencies. Like I said, maybe a true second-line center to add a little more scoring touch than Nazem Kadri could be something they look at, but I don't know if they need it depending on what they'd have to give up.
Geez, you're underselling Nazem Kadri. As a former Leaf, I feel compelled to defend him a little bit, AJ. He slots in as the net front presence on the first power play unit, and he looked very good there at times last season. And I think, again, he's got the luxury of being partnered with 2 guys who can score. And like him, Brandon Saad has quite a bit of bite to his game. So I really like that second line. A few mentions of the first line. It'd be nice to see this group stay healthy all season long. I know Nate McKinnon is one of the guys that a lot of people think could be the leading scorer in this league. He would be helped immensely if Mikko Rantanen and Gabriel Landeskog can compete for at least 50 of the 56 games on the schedule to make this one of the top units in the NHL once again. But they do have options down the line. If Tyson Jost, they're ready to see this guy take the next step. Been waiting on him for a couple of years to do that. If he makes that next step, maybe Nazem Kadri's role is threatened a little bit. JT Compher won't threaten it, I don't believe. Jonas Donskoy is another guy who's played top 6 minutes here, same as Valeri Nichushkin. Nichushkin is listed as a fourth-line winger here. If he lasts in that role all season long, I'll be very surprised because he showed flashes of being an offensive contributor here, and with his size and skill, should be ranked higher than a fourth-line winger. But really, he's had more downs than ups in his career, and that's why he's there legitimately. Same could be said for Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. I look for bigger things from here. And look, at these guys are listed as fourth-line players. That should tell you they have a ton of depth here and a lot of injury insurance should a couple of their top 6 guys go down. Of course, the one guy they can ill afford to lose for any time is Nate McKinnon. I do think he's going to be no worse than the 3rd leading scorer in the league this year, AJ. In terms of our next team, we're looking at the Los Angeles Kings. They had a very quiet offseason, but made a little bit of noise in the last couple of days. First of all, notable to you as a former Penn, Olli Määttä makes the jump to the left coast from the Pittsburgh situation and will play with the Kings this year, upgrading, they hope, their top 4. Troy Grosnick, a guy who's bounced around a little bit in the AHL, is a depth option in the Nets, but the biggest signing that they made came yesterday with the addition of Andreas Athanasiou. I think this guy is an uber-skilled player who just hasn't really found his niche yet in the Detroit situation. He escaped that troubled group. Maybe the fact that they were floundering had a lot to do with his lack of success, but he's going to get lots of opportunity in LA, surrounded by some veteran presence, and I think it will be really good for him, and he looks to be getting a shot at the second-line center, a good spot for him to make his debut in Hollywood. But before we look at the rest of this team, AJ, again, a veteran goalie in the Nets looking to extend his career. He's well decorated, Jonathan Quick. Why don't you tell me about him and his backup this season?
Yeah, Quick is going to be the guy here, and again, I think he probably is looking at 60 to 65% of starts here. He'll really take the bulk of the workload, possibly even 70%. And this is not a knock on the other guys that they have, but Jonathan Quick's just that kind of player that wants more games, more opportunities. So I would expect him to carry a bit of a heavier workload in terms of, overall. As far as the backup goes, look, Cal Patterson is the guy that's projected to come on and take the number 2 role and take that next step. But don't sleep on Troy Grosnick. This is a guy who had, solid numbers the last several years playing in the AHL. Last season went 29-5 in 33 appearances, a .920 save percentage. And look, I'm going to give him a little extra love because he's from my hometown, Brookfield, Wisconsin, native son of ours there. But I definitely think he'll at least push Cal Patterson for the number 2 role. He's a little bit older. Obviously, he's not going to be the heir apparent here to Jonathan Quick, so that could factor into their decisions on what to do there. So overall, yeah, I think Grosnick competes, but Quick will see the bulk of the workload.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Jonathan Quick is one of the leaders of this club still. He's on the books for another couple of years at $5.8 million. You'd like to see them shed that at some point, but really, I think until somebody closes the distance between him and the rest of the guys on the depth chart, he'll be the go-to guy in LA for quite some time, at least this season and possibly beyond until next year. The guys that are going to stand in front of him this year might be the weakest defensive group in this division, AJ, and that's with a guy who ranks for the last 10 years one of the top defensemen in hockey, Drew Doughty, still playing the lion's share of the power play quarterback role and a lot of key minutes that he eats up on a nightly basis. He loves life in LA. He had a chance to leave a couple of years ago, but instead decided to lock himself down there long term, so he'll be there for a while. And he hopes that he has a good new running mate in Olli Määttä, who has some offensive upside. That could be a pretty dynamic first pairing. But beyond that, I don't think there's any fantasy value at all in the rest of the 6-pack here that they're offering. Mikey Anderson and Matt Roy on the second pairing, Curtis McDermott and Shawn Walker on the third pairing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see an offensive upside in any of those 4. So it's Määttä and Doughty carrying the mail for the Kings this season, in my opinion.
Well, the only guy I would maybe mention is Shawn Walker. Now, I'm talking deeper formats, right? If you're in a 10-team redraft league, probably don't pick up Shawn Walker, right? Unless you're playing some sort of weird setting where you've got 6 defensemen or something. But 24 points in 70 games last year, 5 power play assists. So he's getting some opportunities there, limited, but some. So I think he could be a guy maybe to consider. And look, you mentioned Olli Määttä, Paul. He obviously was so absent that you completely forgot he spent last year in Chicago.
Oh,
when
true.
you mentioned they added him from Pittsburgh, I was like, nope, he's been gone for a year. And that just speaks to, how little he did there. So I don't think he's the answer. I would be shocked if he lasts more than 10 games as the left defenseman to play with Drew Doughty. If you want Doughty jumping up into the play, offensively minded, you need a guy a little more D-centric, and you also need a guy who's a little more fleet of foot, who's going to be able to get back and cover for you, and that is just not Olli Määttä's game. If he did have speed at one point, that certainly has not been shown the last couple of years. So for me, I think they're going to be, to your point, Paul, this is probably one of the weakest D groups in the league right now. And that is, as you said, despite having a beast like Drew Doughty on that back end.
You know what? Let me interject. I only said Määttä was a graduate of Pittsburgh and that system. I knew he played with the Hawks last year, but I got to get in a mention to every Penguin guy just because I know that you know this team so well and the players that came through. So that was the situation there. But tell us what you think about the forward grouping here, AJ.
Yeah, it's there's definitely some things to be intrigued about from that standpoint. Ultimately, I think this is still a long-term project here. You're not going to see these guys, producing a lot of wins, I don't think, right off the gate. But there's plenty of options, especially if you are in a dynasty format. That I'll mention some of those guys. But in terms of what deployment looks like right now, Alex Iafallo, Anze Kopitar, and Dustin Brown make out that first line. I think they're really capable of producing. I also wouldn't be surprised to see them periodically move AA to the wing if they need a little bit more scoring. Maybe, if Iafallo or Brown is slumping at all and they want to try and get something going, I wouldn't be shocked to see AA move to a left wing or a right wing spot periodically. Right now, we have him penciled in, and I stress penciled in at this point since the signing just happened yesterday, as the second line center. Jeff Carter on the wing there with Martin Ferk. There's not a lot to love about that line, if I'm being totally honest. Carter is getting, to use your parlance, Paul, a little long in the tooth there. So I think there's some room for improvement here. Martin Ferk could take a step forward here. Really has not shown much since his rookie campaign. 25 points in 68 games back in 2017. Since then, he has a combined 14 points in 47 games over the last 2 years. So he really needs to take a step forward if he's going to fill that spot. Austin Wagner, Gabriel Vilardi is one of those dynasty players, dealt with some back issues that really delayed his NHL opportunities, but we've got him again slotted in potentially as the third line center here. On Adrian Kempe on the other right wing, Michael Amato for the fourth line left wing. And then here's where things get interesting. They've got Alex Turcotte, who could be the fourth line center or even push for more. He was the 5th overall pick in the 2019 NHL draft. I'll just throw one of these out there, Paul, on Wisconsin for the former Badger there, Alex Turcotte. I think he could push for a bigger role. Blake Lizotte obviously got some opportunities last season. He's in the mix, and even a guy like Matt Luff. So there are some things to like. If I'm in a dynasty format and I see Vilardi, Turcotte, or Lizotte is available, I definitely think you might want to consider stashing those guys away for the future. Trevor Moore rounds out your fourth line group here.
Yeah, I like your mention of some of the guys that are currently listed as bottom 6 types here. They have an opportunity in a rebuild that's ongoing to get better roles. You wonder when Dustin Brown will see the first line right wing, for instance, or Anze Kopitar, the first line center. He's not going anywhere soon. But those two guys make me take a look at Alex Iafallo as a guy who could be an interesting pick in season-long leagues. He had a nice season last year, upwards of 40 points, if I recall correctly, and could take a step up in terms of point production per game, higher than that rate, partnered with those two and another year of experience under his belt. You mentioned Jeff Carter. This guy is a goal scorer when healthy, but he's been spending too many stints on the IR or just injured short term, it seems a lot of the time the last couple of years, diminishing his value. But if he's healthy, I like the fit that he might have with a guy like Athanasiou, a very skilled guy who, if he lives up to his abilities and plays with a healthy Jeff Carter, those guys can have a nice partnership. And that might bode well for Martin Ferk, who so far in his NHL career, the claim to fame is not even at the NHL level. It's the fact that he was the hardest shot winner in the AHL All-Star game a couple of seasons ago. That's what I think about when I see this guy's name. Certainly, you mentioned the numbers that he's posted as a pro, certainly uninspiring, and he should be threatened by a guy like Adrian Kempe, who had a bit of a step up last year and reached a 30-point plateau. He could also improve on those numbers if the career trajectory continues to grow the way that it did last year. But the real surprises could be among those bottom 6 guys, rather, that they will threaten to play regularly and move up on that in that 12 pack. And that's what I'm looking for from the likes of Turcotte, Moore, and Lizotte, particularly, in my estimation. But I expect it to be a very long year in Hollywood. In Minnesota, there are a host of new faces here, and a couple of them that really should excite the hometown fans. Cam Talbot solidifying the goalie situation, signed in there in the offseason. Kirill Caprissa, who was leading scorer in the KHL in terms of goal scoring with 33 in 57 games, should juice this offense and get a top 6 opportunity there. Ditto for Marcus Johansson, who moves over in free agency. Nick Bonino is another guy that you know a little bit about from his time in Pittsburgh. Slots in as a depth center. Should somebody get injured in the top 6, though, a viable option there. Nick Bjugstad, another guy that's come through the Pittsburgh situation without much success. We'll hope to rejuvenate his career, ignite his career as a right winger. Dakota Mermis, the only upgrade that I see among the defensemen that weren't there last season. But AJ, I like the Cam Talbot addition. What does that mean to the goalie mix here in Minnesota?
Well, I think the theme for Minnesota, and I'll talk about this as we go throughout the lineup here, is question marks. What are they getting? I think is the big question here. And so what are they getting in terms of Cam Talbot? Are they getting the Cam Talbot who played 73 games for Edmonton, racked up 40 wins? Or are they getting the Cam Talbot who struggled the last couple of seasons and really hasn't produced anywhere near that level of success in the last 2 years? So that's a big question. What are they getting from Kaapo Kähkönen? Is he the real deal? His limited NHL opportunities last year, played just 5 games, did decent, 3-1-1, .913 save percentage in those outings. Had some a real good record with AHL Iowa last season. So again, can he bring his game up to the NHL level? I would expect from the onset, you're going to have Talbot taking the bulk of the workload, but he'll be on a short leash, and they ultimately want to see what they have in terms of the future here in Kähkönen. So I wouldn't be shocked to see 55-45 about the split here.
Yeah, for me, though, this is a DFS look at this. I wouldn't touch either of these guys when they're playing the top 3 teams in this division. It's pretty clear to me who they're going to be. But if you got a chance to play them against the bottom 3, they have a chance to win any of those nights because there's a real divide between the top 3 and the bottom 4 in this division. I think Minnesota slots in as maybe the best of the bottom 4. So that's where the value might come in terms of playing Talbot and Stalock in those situations. But otherwise, be very wary of them. You mentioned that Talbot is a guy who has been around the league for a while. At age 33 season, he signed a 3-year deal at $3.6 million per year. Stalock is a guy who threatened for more playing time, and he's on a very cheap contract of $785,000. But the wild card for me is, what is this import Kaapo Kähkönen all about? He is on his entry-level deal, only age 24. They need to get younger in the nets, and if they can find something in him, maybe that's part of the transition here that will help this team threaten the top 3 teams in this division. But I don't think it's happening this season. On the blue line here, it's a 6-pack of guys. This could be a team that actually is one of the few that protects 4 defensemen ahead of the Seattle draft next season. That's how good the defense is relative to the offense that we find in the top of forwards. But Jared Spurgeon, Ryan Sutter, Matt Dumba, and Jonas Brodin, a pretty solid quartet, none of whom is making any less than $4 million a year. And at the high end, Spurgeon, $7.5 million per year for the next 6 years, it looks like. So a lot of money spent on the back end, and there's a reason why. It's pretty good quality here at the top of the roster. Carson Soucy and Greg Patterson rounded out. They've had some degree of success in terms of regular playing time from time to time, but they won't threaten the top 6 here. All 4 of these guys that I mentioned are really good picks if you're looking for point-scoring defensemen in the NHL. That's what I think of this unit.
Yeah, absolutely. The top 4 are solid and locked in, barring injury. There's not going to be anybody that pushes those guys for minutes or challenges for opportunities. The question for me in this group is, can Dakota Mermis bring his game to the NHL level? In his time with the Arizona Coyotes, he only saw 10 games with them over 2 years. Last year with the Devils, he played in 10 games as well. But the numbers, when you look at the minors, are really solid. With Binnington last year, had 19 points in 53 games, 24 points in 62 games the year before that with Toussaint. And so this is a guy that's shown flashes of talent, went undrafted coming out of the OHL and has really pushed for more and more opportunities. And the question for me is, can he continue to do so and challenge a guy like Carson Soucy or even Brad Hunt for bottom pairing minutes? But there's no way anybody's affecting this top 4, that's for sure. The questions definitely carry forward into the forward grouping, and I'll start with Kirill Caprissa. Again, can he transition that KHL game to the NHL game? Plenty of guys have done it very successfully, but plenty of guys have been flops as well when they try and play on the smaller sheet of ice and different looks in that sense. What are they going to do at center? That's the other question. Right now, Marcus Johansson penciled in as the first-line center. I don't know if that's the best usage of his tools there. I think Joel Eriksson Ek, or, could push for more opportunities, and that would move Nick Bonino up if they move Johansson to the wing. The other issue they have right now is Matt Zuccarello is going to miss the first month of the season here. So what do they get out of him when he comes back? Kevin Fiala fits in as the replacement on the top right wing there with him out. The second line, I mentioned Eriksson Ek will be the center right now, Zach Parise on the left. Nick Bjugstad right now on the right. He's also capable of playing center, so do they move him over? Are they getting the Nick Bjugstad pre-injury like Florida Nick Bjugstad or the injury-plagued Pittsburgh Nick Bjugstad? That's another question that this team has to answer. Third line looks like Jordan Greenway on the left, Nick Bonino in the middle. I think that's a solid addition. I think this team will be challenged if they are going to try and use Nick Bonino as a top six center. I think he slots in perfectly as a third line center, and if they have to move him up because they want to move Johansson to the wing, I think that's going to be a problem for them long term. Ryan Hartman on the right wing. Again, everybody's kind of playing up a line with Matt Zuccarello hurt on that right-hand side. Marcus Foligno on the left wing, fourth line. Victor Rask as the fourth line center. And then Nico Sturm gets the opportunity, I think, to join the roster, although Luke Johnson could also contend for that, or Gerald Mayhew could compete for that spot as well.
You know what? It's going to be incumbent on fantasy pool players to be looking at the RotoWire depth chart on a daily basis. I really don't like the look of this team in the middle of the ice. Marcus Johansson is not a centerman. He's a winger most of the time. And I really think he's miscast as the number one center. They certainly will miss the fact that they don't have Eric Stahl or Mikko Koivu in the younger days, who were manning the 1 and 2 positions here for the last several years. It's quite a difference to look at it and see Johansson at the first line spot. Joel Eriksson Ek could be the guy that moves up in class and really gets a shot to thrive here. I think that's where they pin their hopes at center ice. I agree with you. Nick Bonino is probably best cast as the third line center. Victor Rask has been a real big disappointment for me. I thought this guy had all the tools to do what Alex Barkov did in Florida, but things really haven't panned out for Rask. That's how high I had my expectations for him. He might be a guy who moves up in class here, but he has to show me something before I can really pin any hopes on him. In terms of the rest of the players, there's real hope on the wings, folks. Kevin Fiala had a breakout campaign last season, and along with Matt Zuccarello when healthy, that's a very dynamic-looking right wing in terms of the first two positions. Nick Bjugstad has to get his act together to continue to extend his career. Otherwise, it's lights out for me. This is last chance saloon, as I like to say from time to time when a guy is looking at maybe the last opportunity to make good in the NHL. On the left side, Kirill Caprissa, I wonder what this guy's going to show in the NHL. I already mentioned he was the leading sniper in the KHL. We'll see how it translates into the North American style of play. Zach Parise is a guy who has delivered in terms of my expectations for him, but is a very viable option. He'll be a key to their power play success as well from the left side of the ice. In terms of the next team, we're looking at the San Jose Sharks. We've already panned a couple of the California-based teams. This will be the third team, maybe the best of the West Coast clubs in Cali. And the new faces that they added, well, one was an old face that maybe is one of the signature players in franchise history. That's Patrick Marleau. And the watch will be on to see if he plays enough games to supplant Gordie Howe in the all-time games played list, but that might be one of the highlights of this season, just to see how many times Patrick suits up. Devon Dubnick is over in goal. He was a steady guy in previous stops elsewhere. They're hoping that he threatens the goaltending situation there for more playing time. Ryan Donato, a guy who was once thought to be a possible prolific scorer in other circumstances, gets a chance to revitalize himself and maybe make himself a top six option here. Matt Nieto, Curtis Gabriel, these guys are depth players that they added. What do you think about the goalie situation here now with Jones and Dubnyk in the nets, AJ?
Well, I think entering camp, if you had to pick a guy to be the number one, I think it's still Marty Jones in San Jose, which is astonishing to say after last year. But I would not be surprised if that flips during training camp or at some point during the season. They thought they had a decent up-and-comer in Aaron Dell. He flopped at the same rate as Marty Jones last year, so they went out, they got Devon Dubnyk. And I think he'll compete very early and very quickly for the number one job here. Could be close to a 50-50 split here as well, depending on how they perform. But I think this is an open battle. I think if Marty Jones goes into the year and plays the way he's shown at points in his career, he could go towards 65% of starts. But the same could be said of Dubnick. If Jones really struggles and Dubnick comes in and is on his game, same thing. So really no certainty here, in my opinion, on the back end.
Yeah, you're right about your analysis. They certainly paid a lot of money to Martin Jones. It looked like earlier on in his career he was going to be positioned to compete for a top 10 status in the league among goalies around the loop, but hard-pressed to put him in the top 20 right now, and that's a lot to be paying. $5.75 million per season for the next 3 years, even after this one. He's entering his age 30 campaign, so you got to think he's still in the prime of his career at the moment, and he's going to be challenged to find his form from a couple of years ago to earn that salary or make them feel better about spending that kind of money on him. In front of him, you've got two of the highest scoring defensemen in hockey over the last 5-6 years. That's Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns. You got to think, though, that Carlson, age 30 with some injury issues, and Brett Burns at age 35, maybe on the downside of their careers, and they're paying almost $20 million for that pairing, AJ, so they got to get value out of them. And for this year, at least, it looks like to me, they'll still be the offensive threats. Marc-Edouard Vlasic is kind of a B option offensively, and maybe a solid second pairing, one of the better defensive defensemen in the league too. Mario Ferraro is a guy who took a step up in class and will play a little bit bigger role, I think, going forward. Radim Simek and Jacob Middleton round out the top six that I see, but certainly the offensive mail will be carried by Carlson and Burns here.
Yeah, that'll be, the big thing that they need. They need Carlson to rebound from last season when he had some injury concerns. Now it's interesting to talk about a guy rebounding when he did hit the 40-point mark for looks like the 8th straight year, 7th straight year. But this is a guy that previously was putting up 70, 80 points. So, obviously a somewhat disappointing campaign for him. A bit of a concern in the plus-minus category that he was a minus 15 last year. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of bounce back he has and if he can get back to being a Norris Trophy contender here. In terms of the forward complement, you've got Evander Kane on the left wing, Logan Couture at center, and Timo Meier on the right wing for the first line. I think all three of those guys are pretty secure in their spots here. I don't see a whole lot of challenges for any of those three guys. I think if Kane gets moved off the first line, it's as a strategy thing to move him to spread out the scoring here. I don't think it's necessarily a knock on him or that somebody else is producing at a better level than him. So that would be the first line as I see it. Ryan Donato set for second line left wing, but you mentioned some of his disappointment or lack of producing to those levels. So he's certainly on thin ice there. Tomas Hertl centers that group with Kevin Labanc on the right wing. I think maybe Labanc would be the only guy that could push for more opportunities, but I think rather than breaking up that first line, you'll see him just slot into that first power play unit, and that'll be how they get him more opportunities. Third line right now has Patrick Marleau on the left wing, though I think a center spot for him is certainly possible as well. Dylan Gambrell as the third line center, and Marcus Sorensen on the right wing. This is pretty fluid. I think the only one of these guys that should feel like they're in the correct line and don't have to worry about too many challenges is Patrick Marleau for his spot here. But anybody else, I think, will face challenges from the rest of the lineup. Matt Nieto, Antti Sumela, and Stefan Noesen round out the fourth line, although I think a guy like Noah Gregor, Curtis Gabriel could challenge for more opportunities there as well.
Yeah, Stefan Noesen had 7 goals in 40 games played last year. That tells me he has a bit of an offensive side to his game and might threaten to move up in class. They need somebody to take that step up, though, I think, to push the others here. Otherwise, complacency could set in. Up front on the top line, I'm keeping an eye on Timo Meier. I like the fact that he's maybe the forgotten piece when you consider Kane and Couture are the signature pieces of this offense. Certainly Thomas Hertl, a third player that factors into that grouping, and those three guys will be key to the power play situation. Hertl, before he got hurt, was on his way to a career best season last year too, so don't underestimate him. He could be a sneaky good value pick in your season-long pools going forward. In the next club we're going to look at, we're going to get to the heavyweights in this division who will threaten Colorado. Let's make no bones about it. This is a three-team race in my estimation. I don't think you'll disagree, AJ. So we'll look now at the St. Louis Blues. They made a whole bunch of moves in the offseason and maybe making one in the next couple of days if PTO turns out okay for Mike Hoffman. That was a real surprise move in my estimation because this guy is should have been signed by now by some club in the NHL that was willing to throw $3-4 million at him. I think that's what it's going to take to sign him. St. Louis has the flexibility to do that now with their LTIR situation becoming a little bit clearer. Tarasenko being moved in that direction. But the additions they made include Kyle Clifford, bolstering the depth on the left wing with some toughness. Torrey Krug, maybe the signature addition of all, to replace Alex Pietrangelo on the blue line. Steve Santini, a depth piece there. And John Gillies, maybe a depth piece in the nets. Curtis McKenzie, a left winger who's going to be a bottom six player, no question. Rounds out the grouping here. But the key for me will be to see how this PTO turns out for Mike Hoffman to really give some sense for how the offense looks as we get into the season. But before we look at the offense, you're going to take me through the goalie situation again, AJ.
It starts and stops with Jordan Binnington, absolutely, especially with the departure of Jake Allen. They have Ville Husso and John Gillies to potentially battle out for that number 2 spot, but Jordan Binnington, I would expect, takes upwards of 70, maybe 75% of the starts here. I think he'll face a pretty heavy workload just because I don't see either of the other two options as being particularly viable for them, especially when you're talking about competing against some of the top teams in the league. Now, depending on how the schedule works out, maybe do you give one or give Binnington a couple nights off and you let Husso and Gillies like split a 2-game set against San Jose or Anaheim or LA or something. Maybe that's how they give Binnington some rest opportunities, but I don't think you're throwing Ville Husso out against Vegas or Colorado at any point this season. So there's 16 starts for Binnington right off the bat. So it'll be Jordan or bust for them. That's for sure.
And you know what? I have been a big fan of this guy. He's a local product in the town where I live in Richmond Hill, Ontario. And there's signs up here on the borders, home of Stanley Cup champion Jordan Binnington. His numbers crept up in the wrong direction last season, AJ. His goals against was 2.56. That's higher than the first 2 campaigns in his young career. I look for him to have a bit of a bounce-back campaign, but I'm wondering about the usage, and a guy like Ville Husso is going to have to come through in spades in his opportunities. Otherwise, maybe St. Louis drops a notch in this division. But certainly, all eyes will be on Binnington to be the DFS value play when St. Louis suits up, and maybe in your season longs, he should be one of the first goalies to go if he does get the lion's share of the workload, as you suggest. Protect him up front. He'll be without Alex Pietrangelo. The heart and soul of this team and the captain is gone. He was replaced by Torrey Krug, a guy who has played exclusively in Boston throughout his career, but has been injury-plagued. When he's healthy, this guy's one of the best point-per-game producers among NHL defensemen, but the key is he's been struggling with injury issues for the last couple of seasons, and St. Louis has to hope that his health takes a turn for the better. Otherwise, they will be seeing a drop in productivity from the blue line as a whole with his production missing. They're counting big time on Justin Falk to live up to the contract that he signed. That kind of pushed Pietrangelo out the door. I guess fans are ruining that day right now, but Falk is a guy who has been a power play quarterback in the past, so 2 viable options to run the offense from the back end, maybe even 3 when you consider Colton Parayko, his big size and skill caused him to be in a lot of rumor talk in the offseason, but St. Louis fans have to be happy that he's still in the mix here. That's 3 outstanding offensive possibilities on the back end for my money. Marco Scandella is kind of a B option offensively, but a pretty good defensive defenseman, and a nice pairing there with Parayko on the second unit. Vince Dunn is another guy who is underrated here and has some offensive upside to his game and could see some time on the power play to boost his numbers. That's 5 guys that can contribute offensively among the 6-pack. Robert Bertuzzo is a tough nut on the back end and solidifies that third pairing. They added some depth in Steve Santini should injuries crop up. Nico Mikkola, an interesting prospect as well. So I really like the depth here on the blue line. And I haven't even mentioned the fact they have Carl Gunnarsson, who is nicked up a little bit at the moment, but should threaten easily for a top 6 when he's healthy. So no fewer than 9 quality defensemen to choose from when you're putting together a unit on the back end. And that's got to make Husso and Binnington smile, AJ.
Absolutely. Now, Torrey Krug is not going to replace the production of Alex Pietrangelo. That's just not, if St. Louis fans have that expectation, you are going to be disappointed. But he's a decent fill in for that. It's hard to replace a guy like Pietrangelo. It's impossible to replace a guy like Pietrangelo. But you look at Krug, consistently has been right around, this past season. If he had played maybe one more game, he would have hit the 50-point mark for the 4th straight year. That's, certainly quality production from your back end. You did mention the injury concerns, and that's totally valid. But I think this guy's capable of being, in a regular season, capable of producing around the 50-point mark. I would expect him to maybe challenge for 40 this year in the abridged season. So certainly decent production out of him. In terms of the forward complement, look, you mentioned the PTO with Mike Hoffman. I think this is all just like a technical constraint. They get him on the PTO until they can figure out exactly what LTIR looks like for Tarasenko. And they can have him start practicing with the team now while he's on that tryout. But I think for all intents and purposes, it looks like it'll be a 1-year, around $3.5 to $4.5 million contract for Hoffman. So basically signed, albeit not technically. I suppose another team could come in at this point and offer him something outrageous and snipe him away from St. Louis. That's technically a possibility, but I expect he will sign with them. And as a result, he figures to slot in as that first line left winger to really, once they get Tarasenko back, talk about a top line that has some scoring potential of Hoffman, Ryan O'Reilly, and Tarasenko on a first group. That's a pretty dangerous trio there. For now, it looks like David Perron will slot in as that right winger. You got a couple of big snipers there. The only downside is Ryan O'Reilly's numbers could take a bit of a hit because he's going to have to do a lot of work, I think, to get Hoffman and David Perron the puck. So maybe his goal numbers drop a little bit with that combination, but certainly could rack up plenty of assists. The second line's looking like Jaden Schwartz, Robert Thomas continuing to move up, continuing to improve, and Braden Shen on the right wing. Third, you're looking at Zach Sanford, Tyler Bozak centering that line, and Sammy Blais. I like that combination of some up-and-comers with an established guy like Bozak who can really kind of drive this line. Kyle Clifford, Oscar Sundqvist, and Ivan Barbashev round out the fourth line right now. But again, you've got guys like Jacob De La Rose who could challenge, Jordan Kyrou. And again, all this gets shuffled around once they get Tarasenko back. Unfortunately, they will have to fill the loss of Alexander Steen, who is forced to retire due to back injuries. But I think they've done that by signing Mike Hoffman here.
Yeah, I like the fact that Hoffman will be playing with a guy who's one of the better puck distributors in the NHL, and Ryan O'Reilly. I've been waiting for this opportunity for Hoffman for a couple of years now. I thought he was going to get that look in previous stops, but he's almost guaranteed to get it now with St. Louis, and should threaten a 30-goal scoring pace in a normal year. It might drop it down to around 20 this season in the shortened season that we're facing at 56 games played. Perron also one of the top point producers per game, that St. Louis offers. So a really dynamic-looking top unit, as I said, all focused around Ryan O'Reilly's ability to move the puck around. The second line, I think you're going to flip-flop Schenn and Thomas. Schenn played a lot more center ice than Thomas did last year, if I recall correctly. So I think semantically you're going to be looking at Schenn as the center there and Thomas on the right wing. Jaden Schwartz, another guy who gets regular duty on the first power play unit. So they've got a really good look among the top six. And veteran Tyler Bozak and Sammy Blais and Zach Sanford, a credible third line. And then you've got a lot of depth options here who will be really good injury insurance types. Kyle Clifford can play third line minutes. Oscar Sundqvist has moved up and played even the top 6 minutes in the past. Ivan Barbashev, same for him. So real good injury insurance. And we haven't even talked about, I haven't mentioned Mckenzie Mchechrin in addition to Delarose and Kyrou that you mentioned. So that's going 5 lines deep to show you they've got a wealth of options offensively in St. Louis, but certainly they're going to still miss Tarasenko. And if you were planning on using him in the regular season, it's already been declared he's out for the entire regular season campaign. We wind up our look at this division by the Vegas Golden Knights and their moves in the offseason. Of course, the big prize was Alex Pietrangelo. They plucked him off the free agency list and signed him to a big deal. Carl Dahlstrom, depth defenseman. Dylan Sikora, depth forward. Danny O'Regan, depth center. Thomas Yurko, a veteran right winger who should be good insurance for the top 6 on the right side particularly. And Carl Dahlstrom, I mentioned him already on the back end, so he got 2 mentions here. He should be happy. AJ, the Vegas Knights and the Nets, they spent a lot of money on the pairing that they're going to be icing this year.
Well, I mean, obviously, I have my thoughts and feelings as I sport my Golden Knights Marc-Andre Fleury jersey here. Got the old 29 on here. So I think Fleury should be the starter. That's very clearly where my heart lies. But obviously, they are paying Robin Lehner to take over as the kind of future for Fleury. But you're right. It's a lot of money. It's about $12.5 million to pay these 2 guys. And so I would imagine maybe some sort of share in the Nets here. But that doesn't seem to necessarily be Peter DeBoer's MO. He is not tied to Marc-Andre Fleury. That was very clear last year. And so I don't know, maybe DeBoer's willing to pay a guy $7 million to sit on the bench. Wouldn't necessarily be the choice I made if I were the head coach, but we'll see how that all pans out. So as far as workload projections, I mean, I would expect closer to 50-50, but based on what they did in the postseason, looks like DeBoer might be willing to give Robin Lehner closer to 60-65% of the workload. And not really worry about having to sit Marc-Andre Fleury as the backup. But, not the choice I would make, but I'm trying my best to not let my personal feelings come through on this one because, the flower is my guy there. I'll let you take us through the back end then, Paul.
Well, you know what? I've got a comment here, and maybe it's a function of the 56-game schedule being condensed as it is. This could be a real strength of this team, that they're going to be icing a number 1 goalie every single night. Not a lot of teams in the league can say that. So I think the goalie split could be a little more even than most people, including yourself, might suggest. I'm going to say it's 55-45. Leonard getting the larger share of the workload, but only slightly. There will be a lot of back-to-backs here, and there's no problem for me seeing that situation unfold. And Marc-Andre Fleury, always happy by nature, should be happier than he might have been going into an 82-game schedule. He'll be getting almost half of the work here, at least for this season, and they can punt the fact that they don't need to deal him this season and maybe take advantage of the fact that they're playing this condensed schedule with such a nice quality tandem in the Nets. And they'll be well protected in front of the crease this year with a very solid and deep defense. Braden McNabb partnering with Alex Pietrangelo could be a guy that you should be looking at in your fantasy leagues for season long. If he passes to Pietrangelo, Pietrangelo scores or sets up somebody else, that's a nice secondary assist option for McNabb, and he's got a very good shot himself. So a lot of offensive possibilities from both players here. Pietrangelo is certainly the linchpin. quarterback in the power play. In terms of a second option, one guy who was their first option on the power play, Shea Theodore, might take a bit of a hit in terms of his points per game, but certainly another guy who should be among the top scoring defensemen in the league just because of his overall skill set. Partnered very well with Alec Martinez to be one of the top four packs in the league, certainly the class of this division, in my estimation. Four guys who can carry the mail offensively. And you can add a fifth when you consider Zach Whitecloud, who had a nice late season push and showed his offensive skill set throughout the late regular season and playoffs for the Knights. And Nick Holden, a very solid guy to round out the top six here. Depth players like Nicholas Haig and Carl Dahlstrom and Dylan Coughlin won't see much ice time here unless one of those six guys gets hurt. But 1 through 6, maybe the best six-pack on defense in this division, AJ.
What intrigues me with this group is how they're going to deploy the top power play. Now, kind of traditional sense would tell you that Pietrangelo will quarterback the number 1, Shea Theodore will quarterback the number 2. But given that, Theodore had a third of his points last season came on the power play, he logged over 3 minutes per night with that top unit. Maybe they consider looking at having two defensemen on that top 5 power play unit. I certainly think it could raise some questions about, who fills in then as the number 2 guy for them. But, it's hard to keep a player like Shea Theodore, who has produced so well for them, watching from the bench when your first unit is out there, when he's had so much success for them. So it'll be interesting to watch. I certainly agree with you, though. If I'm in like a limited keeper league where I can only pick, 5-6 guys to maybe keep, I would consider letting Shea Theodore walk, just because there are so many questions about what his production might look like if he does get relegated to the second group here. As far as the forwards go, the first group is going to be pretty much the same as what we're used to seeing in Jonathan Marchessault, William Carlson, and Riley Smith anchoring that first line. This is a trio that has produced and should continue to produce well for them, although the playoffs were a bit of a disappointment across the board in terms of forward production here. So hopefully for their fantasy owners and for Vegas fans, that doesn't carry into the new year. The big question immediately comes with the second line center. Paul Stastny is gone, so who's going to fill that role in between Matt Pacioretty and Mark Stone? There's a number of players. I think Cody Glass gets first look, but his hold on that should be considered tenuous at best. Chandler Stephenson, Tomas Nosek, all could see opportunities there. They could even try and think outside the box and move a Riley Smith into center or something like that. So I think that's the biggest question mark for this team is second line center. Right now, as I said, we have Cody Glass. Third line looks like Alex Tuck, Chandler Stephenson, Nicholas Waugh, rounding out that third line. And then a bunch of kind of tougher bruisers here, if you will, for that fourth line in William Carrier, Thomas Nosek, and Ryan Reeves. There's a couple of players you mentioned. Tomas Jurko could challenge for a spot. I think Keegan Colasar, Dylan Sakura, both could challenge there as well. And then one final question. Are we ever going to see first ever Vegas Golden Knights signing Reed Duke play in an NHL game? Can he secure that? It's one of those things where that's your trivia question. Who was the first player the Golden Knights ever signed? It was Reed Duke, and he hasn't played a single game for them yet.
All right, partner. You got to come clean. Did you take French lessons this offseason? You nailed Nicholas Waugh here, too. That's 2 for 2 today. I'm very impressed. And longtime listeners of our show have to give a nod to you. You really brought your game today with the French-Canadian studies at the forefront. In terms of my assessment of this group offensively, of course, you mentioned the top 3, Marchessault, Carlson, and Smith, been longtime line mates. interesting note for me, Willie Carlson was their goal-scoring leader in the first year of this franchise, but steady and steep decline offensively in bulging the twine has dotted his resume, and he needs to bounce back from that, I think, to really deliver fantasy value this season between those two wingers. He's more than a puck distributor. This guy's a goal scorer, and he needs to show that again. And he'll be pressed to do that because of the deficiency that you spot, unless Glass fills in admirably on the second line. They'll need Carlson to develop, rediscover that offensive firepower that he's displayed in the past. Glass certainly has the inside track on the second line center role. Couldn't ask for a better situation, surrounded by Pacioretty and Stone, two of the more proven scorers on the wing in the entire league, flanking him. So it's a real plum assignment. And again, I'll remind listeners to check back to RotoWire's depth chart to see who's playing in between those two guys. Right now, it looks like Glass gets the look, but Chandler Stevenson waiting in the wings. And you mentioned they have a wealth of other options there. Alex Tuch is another guy. If he was playing anywhere else, he'd be a top six forward. That's how good I think he is. So don't sleep on him as a late round pick, and certainly injury insurance in the Vegas situation. AJ, that completes our assessment of what is a two-tier division in my estimation. I think it's reflected in my view on how this division will pan out. And I just got to look at your rankings. I think we're pretty much in sync here. So why don't you walk us through 1 through 8, what you think the final order of the standings will be in the West Division of the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that, as you mentioned, Vegas has probably the best goaltending tandem in the league in two starting netminders will put them right up there, and they've got a lot of pieces, but the question mark at center has me putting Colorado as number 1 in this division. You know, Nathan McKinnon, as you said, could challenge for the top scoring for the scoring title this year. I think that's certainly a possibility. So I've got Colorado 1, Vegas 2, and St. Louis not far behind them. You highlighted the depth. They've got Jordan Binnington. Maybe if his numbers dip, you could see this change, but I totally agree with what you've said throughout the show, is that this is tier 1 of the league, or of the division rather. From there, I like Minnesota right now to be the number 4. There are a lot of questions, as I highlighted, but I think things could go their way. I like what Bill Guerin is doing to build out that team. So I've got them as the number 4. I think San Jose has a bounce back year. A lot of injuries there. They brought in Dubnick to shore up the net mining a little bit. So I have them as 5. Arizona, there's too many things I think that are questionable here, which is why I have them down at the 6. You know, losing Taylor Hall is a big one. They didn't really address that. They trade away Derek Stepan. And look, I think, as I said, Oliver Ekman Larson won't finish the season with the Coyotes. So that's another spot that they'll need to fill. And then Anaheim and LA are just too far down into rebuilds. They have fantastic netminders in John Gibson and Jonathan Quick, but there's just so many holes here. They're on the rebuild. I think there's reasons for optimism when you look at both teams, but they're not going to go anywhere quite yet.
I have only a very slight variance from what you're saying, and to me, I'm already looking forward to the first round playoff between Vegas and St. Louis, and I think Colorado's going to be licking their lips thinking they're going to get a carcass to play in the second round, because those teams are going to lock horns, and I'm sure that's one series you can pencil in for a 7-gamer right now. I've got Colorado at the top of the heap like you can. I don't think there's too many prognosticators who think that Colorado will not win this division, so I'm right with them as you are. But Vegas and St. Louis, I can't wait for that series. The intrigue for me is in 4 and 5. Who's going to be the sacrificial lamb for the Avs in the first round? I think it's going to be Arizona, AJ. I think they've got a veteran tandem in the nets that I like. They've got quality youth sprinkled throughout their offense that I think some of them are going to take a big next step. And I don't think they're finished in terms of moves before the season starts. They're one team that has some flexibility, I think, going forward. So I'm going to give them the nod over Minnesota, a team that is in a major rebuild and really stuck at center. And I think when I think about building a team out, I think you got to have strength down the middle. They really don't. And so that's why I put them in the 5th spot. And then it's the 3 California-based teams that might have this the fan base thinking, oh, when is baseball season going to start? Because they're not going to get much excitement on the hockey side with Anaheim, San Jose, and LA rounding out this division. So that's our look at the Western Division. We want to hear from our listeners to see what they think, 1 through 8, whether we've got it anywhere close to right or wrong. But AJ, any final thoughts before we sign off and look forward to next week when we preview the Central Division of the NHL? We're getting closer to the Pittsburgh Penguins, but we're going to save them for last just to draw it out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm excited. You know, we're getting so close. Training camp rosters have started to be announced, so that's going to be really interesting to watch and see which players come back from overseas. There were a ton of guys loaned over there to start the year, and it's going to be interesting to see what guys get opportunities to come back. I'm interested to see how this whole taxi squad thing works and the call-ups that, you know, it sounds like you're going to have to call up a guy from the AHL to the taxi squad where he'll then have to quarantine into, you know, protocols. So you really can only add on it. You know, if you have a last minute injury, you're only able to add from your taxi squad guys, not necessarily your AHL guys. And so it's going to be an interesting process this year, and I can't wait for it to start. That's for sure.
And one of the conclusions that I want you to feel better about is, don't worry, pal. Fleury's going to play more than you think. AJ, that wraps up this episode of Puckcast with Statsman and AJ, RotoWire's signature fantasy hockey podcast. Listeners, you're invited to join us next week as we preview the Central Division of the NHL. Please remember to send your comments or questions on Twitter. Follow me, Paul Bruno, at Statsman22, and you can follow AJ at AJ Scholes24. As always, we invite you to listen into Puckcast to get our tips to stay out of the competition in your fantasy hockey planning and research. Don't forget, you can also watch us on YouTube now to see how good-looking AJ is. He's got a real nice-looking beard going. So long, everybody.